We're back with another PCBH Corner. We have a very exciting topic, a topic that I feel like has come up for the last 9 years. And we may have talked about it in other forms or within other PCBH Corners or trainings, but it has never gotten its own PCBH Corner. So the topic is crisis situation. What do you do clinically? Is this a situation where you continue to use a contextual interview? Is this a situation where you default to some type of tool or maybe a screener and then a tool? Do you make a safety plan? So what do you do in primary care? Ultimately, not if, but when a crisis situation comes up. So I'm going to give a scenario. You receive your BHC and you receive a warm handoff for an adult who's experiencing suicidal ideation, and as the physician got into it, they were not able to contract for safety, essentially. And so it hit the threshold of, the PCP saying, hey, we got to talk to this patient in a way to where we get some type of safety secured for them. And so now you get the handoff. When you go into that room, is this a situation where you give a Columbia rating scale? Do you do a safety planning tool, or what do you do?
I get excited about this conversation because it's actually one of my favorite things to talk about in a lot of ways. Whether it be suicidality within PCBH and contextualism, crisis interventions, whatever it might be. A couple of things that my mind goes to, and the first part is it's an interesting question about what do you do. And I know we talk about this regularly with people. It's like, oh, well, what do you do? That almost indicates like there's an option of doing something different.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's one way that I would approach. Is my mic okay? Or is it in the...
Oh. Yeah, I think it was like that actually last visit to you.
I think it will be fine. But there we go. Okay. The indication that there would be something else that I would do just does not make sense to me. Like it does not compute to me because, again, I am a contextualist. I believe the only thing that matters is context. So regardless if this is diabetes management, regardless if someone's trying to quit smoking, whether it's depression, whether someone's having suicide ideation, that is suicidal ideation. That is a behavior that's coming from a context that I'm going to be interested in that context.
Well, I think maybe that this is the part where it goes two different ways, because if you're looking at it from a targeted approach, that with a diabetes visit, you do this, and a smoking cessation visit, you do this, and depression visit, you do this, then that would totally make sense why the question would come up. Like, oh, well, what do you then do? Because we know with diabetes, we're going to be looking at your diet, and you're going to be looking at your exercise, you're going to look at your treatment adherence. We know with smoking cessation, we're going to be looking at when did you start, smoking, and what are you currently at, and your stage of change. So we have these things that are, and all very important things that we should know as a BHC, but it implies that now if there's suicidal ideation as the presenting concern, well then you're going to go and you're going to home in on the suicidal ideation. However, you're saying as a functional contextualist, you wouldn't approach any of those visits differently.
None of them would.
That we just described. You're going to still come at it from a functional contextualist lens, which looks like what?
Which would look like, again, me giving my introduction about who I am as a BHC, and then jumping into the contextual interview and wanting to get to know this person. I think back to, and I always love telling your story, which it's your story when you were participating in the research project and they were assessing clinicians' ability of assessing suicidality. And one of the things I love so much about that is that based on the questions that you asked, you almost like stumped the person that was role playing.
Yeah.
Because it's like you were asking contextual interview questions who was presenting as someone who was suicidal, but they didn't know the contextual information.
Yeah, I like broke the...
Yeah.
I don't want to be like ego about it, but the patient who was role playing the suicidal ideation, like you're saying, they didn't know the contextual factors about their own character. And so they had to kind of like on the fly make them up, but then it didn't really match with their presentation.
Correct.
And then the feedback that they give it to the clinicians, the feedback was, You deviated a lot. You didn't talk too much to me about suicidal ideation. You talked to me about these other things, and so that was confusing.
Yeah, and again, to the point where it's almost like to the point, it's like, is this how we've trained generations of providers?
We have.
To just separate out suicide and crisis from their context? Like, one of the things that we know, and particularly about suicide, is that it is something that is usually in response to a situation that is going on with them. You couldn't have said that better.
And it's like a separate entity.
Right, and it's really interesting when you start to think about it. It's like, why would we treat it that way? What are we thinking? People just wake up and there is something completely like they caught, we also oftentimes say about catching the depression.
You tripped and you fell and you caught the depression.
Like, you tripped and fell and you caught the crisis. You tripped and fell and you caught the suicide. Like, that doesn't make sense. And one of the things I always remember from Kirk, and Kirk has, maybe we can put the link to Kirk's video on suicide in this.
Yes, great idea.
He says within that, whenever you can bring anything, and particularly crisis or suicide, whenever you can bring it back into the realm of normal human experiences, the angst, the worry, the fear just washes away. Because now it's not something that, you're broken, this is really, really bad. Because think about the juxtaposing those different things, right? I go in, first thing I do, the PCP has already freaked you out because now they're bringing someone else in because you told me that you're suicidal. Now they're bringing someone else in because, oh, buddy, this is getting serious, right? And I've had patients tell me. They've been concerned about even telling anybody about suicide because of our response about how it is. So then I come in, I'm really kind of like, oh, buddy, really holding this very...
Kids' gloves.
Rigidly. Kids' gloves, got to make sure that everything's okay. I give you another screener that asks you some questions about like how severe it is. The BHC looks at that, you can almost see it's like, oh God, this is like pretty severe. They start asking me questions about, wow, you got to really do this. Like, what's your plan? What's your access to all these different things? Like, thinking about that experience as a human. Is it normalizing? Is it bringing it back into the realm of human experiences, normal human experiences? Versus someone that comes in, says their introduction, gets into the life, learns about you as a human, and at the end is able to say, oh, that makes sense. That makes sense why this is hard right now.
We've been saying about the last few corners about being provocative and about being kind of nervous to say things.
Yeah.
And I am nervous to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think the way that we've trained about suicidality and crisis response is a very clinician-centric view, and that most of what we're doing is to help soothe ourselves instead of soothing the patient. And I understand it comes from good intentions.
No doubt.
It comes from the intentions of we know what could happen and then we're terrified of it. But when, in general, is fear a place that's going to produce clarity?
Correct.
So we're doing so much of what we're doing out of an attempt to soothe our own fear as a clinician. And you think that a patient doesn't notice that? Like you just said, there's this beautiful thing of like juxtaposing of like treating them like they're glass about to break, and then really just targeting this one little aspect instead of zooming out and going big about like you as a person. And how crazy is it to, like we're saying, to extract suicidality from a person's core being?
Correct. There would almost be, my mind says, there would be I always think it's important to do the CI or gather context. I will say this, that would probably be the most important time to gather context, to do the CI, to get on what's going on around this person. And it's not to say, and I also want to make sure to say, because my mind's going to beat me up about being nervous too about these things. I've seen people do like, the Columbia and different things in a very caring and kind way. So it's not to say you can't do those things within those ways of being a human with them. Still though, it just still separates it out from the context. And my hope is that by the time I end any single patient, that they feel seen, heard, and what they're experiencing, someone else gets to the point that I can't understand where it's coming from.
And I think those tools and different trainings are so important to have the information in your head to know, about intent and means and access. All that stuff is so important. You should have etched into your brain the same way you should have etched into your brain about treatment adherence, diet, exercise for somebody with diabetes. That needs to live in your brain. So we're not saying that you shouldn't have it.
Correct.
We're just saying use the contextual interview as the primary focus and fill in that information that you have and you want to get through the lens of knowing about their love, work, play, knowing about their life.
Correct.
You should be able to answer all those questions that are all the key aspects of suicidality. You should be able to answer them based upon your contextual interview that you've done.
Absolutely. If you think about the questions that you get through the contextual interview, you get about social support, you get about access to different things. Like there's so many different things that even the CI is just going to produce naturally.
Yes.
That people are just trying to add. Like again, you get to accomplish all the above with doing the CI. Most importantly, though, it goes back to Kirk's quote. It brings it back into the realm of
It's humane.
It's a humane approach for this. So if someone's dealing with a crisis, if someone's having a suicidal ideation and stuff, my approach is very similar to that. And it's amazing to me, a lot of times, again, this is anecdotal, and I think it's always important for us to call it anecdotal versus like research and stuff. Anecdotally, when I've gone into these visits, it's amazing you could see literally as we're progressing through the questions, this calm and peace that starts to come over the person. That I'm interested in them, they're starting to reflect almost like simultaneously. They're reflecting and it's like, okay, yeah, that's going on. That's been tough. That's been hard. It really is almost a profound moment just even watching what happens within these visits. Again, anecdotally, and it's a very interesting thing that happens.
And as a clinician, especially a new clinician, going into each and every visit in the same way, in knowing, in trusting that the information that you seek is found in the answers to the contextual interview will calm the clinician down.
Amen.
And it will help them from being tunnel vision to broad. And as that happens and the clinician becomes more settled, because there's nothing to panic about. All the answers are found, everything that you need to know as a clinician is found in when you do the contextual interview. But you need to fully understand that and believe that. And when that happens, you calm down, patient feels it, they calm down, everything's back into normal existence.
Bob Rosenbaum talked about this, about how much of our perceptions as humans is based on another person's reaction to what we're having, right? So what you just said there, having a clinician that's calm and asking these questions is literally an intervention in of itself. Because now as we're receiving this information, we're responding in a calm manner that is bringing this crisis back down to reality, back down to and the patient is picking up. It's like, oh, this person they're still engaged with me right now. They're not panicking. They're not freaking out.
Then like you were saying, like people have straight up said, like, I'm not going to talk about it with different people because of their reaction. So you are creating an environment. The stimulus is one in which they're going to they're going to start disclosing more and more, which if you look at crisis management, suicidality or homicidality or anything, you're going to want the person to open up and to share as many details of the circumstance as possible, because the more details you know, then you can intervene in the most appropriate way.
If there was ever a time to be a human, it would be during that. And what do we always say about the contextual interview? It's a stimulus control that reminds us to be a human.
And to be
curious with this person.
So I like what you said. With the contextual interview, if you're like, well, I'm not really sure when or not to use the contextual interview, which we would argue to use it every time.
Yeah.
There is no better time.
No better time.
To do the contextual interview during those moments.
And maybe this is something we'll do. We have a list of role plays that we want to do. Maybe this is a role play that we'll do for a video demonstration. About managing a visit within crisis, about how we go about the CI.
Yeah, because it almost makes it sound too easy. Like, well, you just do the contextual interview.
Right.
Whereas if we can role play it, you can kind of get into some of the nitty gritty. And nothing of this is easy per se. But I will say, as a clinician, suicidality doesn't stress me out one bit.
Not at all.
I feel cool as a cucumber because I just know when I'm going to go talk to the person, whoever it is, that they are a human experiencing a moment or something, and I know that the context from which the symptoms are arising, I know that it makes sense.
My mind says, and I don't know if this sounds bad or not, tell me if it does, I get so excited about those visits.
Yeah, I do too.
Because of the opportunity, as you said, to be a human with someone who's going through a moment, that's having a human experience that I get to be a part of. And I want to know about that.
I worry about sometimes if that person is going to have a moment with somebody who's panicked about it. And then they kind of learn, oh, if I talk about it, all these things, something they might not even feel like they want to talk about. Then it's like, well, now everyone's asking them all these things. And if they're not, it's almost like backing folks into a corner. And now you're at the point where it's like, well, you can't leave.
It's a double bind.
Unless, you can't leave unless you tell me you're going to be okay. So I get excited when this happens too, because it is a very normal. It's not about just acting like it's normal. It really is normal.
Correct. And again, I think people would be able to pick that up. Like if you're just like, oh, this is a normal thing and stuff, but you haven't asked one question about what's going on in life, it's like, how the hell do you know if it's normal? Right. It's another benefit of just even doing the contextual interview questions is because it now allows you to actually believe, oh, this is normal. Like this is what is supposed to be here.
9 years, thousands of patients, or 10 years actually, because the year before our internship year of doing this, especially in these last 9.5 years at CHCW, I've never been in a situation where I couldn't sit there and be like, huh.
I know.
I see where you're coming from. And so many times you say, huh, I see where you're coming from, and there is a solution other than going to the emergency department.
Correct.
And it's so many times. And every once in a while, maybe once a year, on average, twice a year, maybe. I don't know. I think about once a year for me, we hit this impasse, and for whatever contextual reason, they are unable to stay safe. And in that case, then the ER is the best.
Resources.
Going to the resources that are needed. And so many times, you're able to have this candid conversation, lay it all out on the table, and the patient is able to come up with an alternate plan to keep themselves safe.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing, because when you bring it back into the realm of human experiences, guess what happens? The range and the breadth of what can be done now as far as interventions grows exponentially, right? If it's not something that's supposed to be here, we have very few ways of...
I apologize. I'm having a little bit of a coughing fit. I don't know if it's going to temper here.
If we have a rigid way of looking at it, that this thing is not supposed to be here, we have very few ways about intervening with it. If it's supposed to be here, it's infinite now, the way we can look at these things.
So I think that answered our question.
So, as always, give us your thoughts. Let us know where people's minds are going. Respond back, comment, email us. But as always, and Bridge, thank you so much for giving this question, because it's a one that we get commonly asked in a lot of ways. But thanks for stopping by and let us know where your mind goes.
Thank you guys so much. Look forward to hearing your questions, your thoughts, and contributions.